Today we're going to disassemble and reassemble the LEV valve, the licensed electric valve made by Lancer. To get into it, we're going to remove the front cover. It just slides up and pulls right out. You'll see the little grooves right there. Easy enough. And then to remove the top cover, we're going to loosen this center screw. Okay, the lid will slide straight up. Easy as that. Now the reason we're getting into this valve is sometimes the valve may crack. And instead of replacing the complete valve assembly, which can be expensive for our customers, we're going to show you how to rebuild the block. Common issue you'll see with cracking will be on the soda side of the valve. You might get a hairline crack here and it leaks a little bit of soda water. You'll see a constant drip going down into your drip tray. That's a good sign that the main valve body needs replaced. So we're going to remove all the components. The first thing we want to do is shut off our valve block, our mounting block. Now when these are in this position here, this is in the on position. To turn it off, we recommend grabbing a shut-off tool. I like to call it a hockey stick. And we turn this. And that shuts off the flow of syrup. And the other one turns the opposite way, and that will shut off the water side, the soda water or plain water side. So when we look at our LEV valve, you notice here it's stamped water and syrup. And this is where we do our ratios, or adjustment screws to do ratio. When we screw this screw in, or clockwise, screw it in, you get more flow. If you back it out, you will get less flow. So water side's always on our left, the syrup side is always on the right. To separate the valve from the mounting block, first we did shut it off. You're going to pull up on this bail wire, and I recommend, before pulling the valve off from the block, have this still plugged in to your transformer. Make sure that shut off actually shut off the flow of syrup and the flow of water. So once we confirmed it has shut off, we're going to unplug the harness, open our bail wire, and remove the mounting block. Now on the mounting block here, you can have some leaks. There are O-rings in here that tend to swell up. And on our tower, you're going to have O-rings in the back here as well. You notice there is a ball valve in here. So if we zoomed in here, you're going to see this is in the closed position. As I turn this screw here, you can see right through that ball valve there. So there is an O-ring that's in there, which prevents water coming out when you shut it off. Those O-rings can swell up from time to time. So if your shutoff is not working, it could be an indicator that that O-ring has failed, needs replaced. On the valve itself here, first thing we want to do is remove our nozzle and diffuser. So the nozzle will come out with just a little twist here, counterclockwise. You can see the little grooves there. The nozzle will remove, and that diffuser pulls straight out here. So how this works is, when we're operating our valve, the soda is going to go through all these series of holes on the outside here. Your syrup will go inside the middle here. So when we do dispense our product, the syrup and the water are blended in this nozzle. It acts like a mixing bowl. So syrup's straight down the middle here. It comes out and sprays out to the sides, hitting that nozzle. And the soda is going to wash down and blend the soda with the syrup. This is a 3.0 valve. 3.0 valve. What that means is for every second I hit my lever and the product's dispensed, it's pouring at a flow rate of 3 ounces per second. Now LEV does have another model, the 4.5 valve. The 4.5 valve is going to have a larger nozzle, and you get 4.5 ounces for every second. So it's a lot faster flow. Main difference between the 3.0 and the 4.5 valve is the nozzle, of course. The mounting plate, you're going to notice there's 3 notches in here that matches up with that nozzle. And internally in here, your flow controls are going to be larger to allow for more flow of syrup and water. But today we are going over the 3.0 valve. Once the valve is removed, we're going to remove the 6 screws on the bottom plate here. Just Phillips screwdriver. So the longer screws go around the nozzle. All 4 of these are the same sizes. The smaller screws are going to go around or next to the lever here. Now when we remove this bottom plate, pull this out like a 45-degree angle. Be careful not to lose these springs in here. These springs are really important when we let go of that lever. These springs are going to push up on our paddle arms and stop the flow of water and syrup. So it's crucial that these springs are in place. If these are missing, you may see a steady leak out of the nozzle when no one's using the valve at all. So I just leave it on the bottom plate as I push that to the side. We're going to remove our lever here. This is a self-serve lever here. This is spring loaded. I always, on the opposite side of that spring, I will take a screwdriver and just gently pry up off that little tab there and give this a twist. The lever should come off with that spring. Leaving that spring in there or on that lever makes it a lot easier when we reinstall the lever later on. We know the correct position because it's sitting on that lever. Now we're going to remove our micro switch and harness that's hooked up to the solenoid here. So what we can do is remove this retainer clip here. This switch will slide straight up with the harness. I leave it all plugged in because we're just going through a rebuild. And I leave it on the solenoid assembly as well. So to remove the solenoid, you're going to remove these small screws right here. These 2 Phillips screws. And then this solenoid will slide straight on up. And now we can see our armature in here. So the armature just slides right out of that yoke like so. So how this valve operates is when we energize this solenoid with 24 volts AC, it turns an electromagnet. So inside this coil, this coiled up wire in here, when it's energized, this armature is metal, so it magnetizes, it pulls this up. So when this pulls up, it's pulling up on this yoke in the valve. They call it a yoke because it looks almost like, I always say, you know, a steering wheel on an airplane is called a yoke. It has that Y shape to it. But as we energize that solenoid, we pull up on the armature. You notice that the yoke is pushing down on these paddle arms, which allows the flow of soda and syrup to travel through the valve and out to the nozzle. Next thing I'm going to do is remove this bail wire. Just push this clip in and that wire will come straight out. Now we can remove the lower housing which holds the paddle arms in place. So these 2 long screws on the top here we're going to remove, and these screws are the same size as the 4 that are on that bottom mounting plate. All right, once those screws are out, we can just wiggle this bottom piece, and the paddle arms may come out with the lower housing, or it may stay in the upper body there, but we can just pull those out. But these are called paddle arms, and some techs may refer to them as a banjo. Looks sort of like a banjo here, but you'll notice over time this is rubber, so it does tend to swell up. You may notice that little indentation in there that's coming off the lower housing. Sometimes this will swell up. You know, we have minerals in the water that might eat away with this, chemicals, may have some acids in our syrups, but they can tend to eat away at that rubber or make it swell up. So these common part to swap out. So I would, in your toolbox, I would definitely carry these paddle arms. They come in, you know, I'd carry a bag of 50 just in case, because you can go through a lot of these. So how you know these are bad is when you do your ratio. So we're turning our adjustment screws in, and we cannot increase the flow of water, or you cannot increase the flow of syrup. It's a good indicator that this paddle arm is swollen and needs replaced. Probably the most common issue with these valves. So at this point, all we have is, well, we do have the yolk in here. How the yolk comes out is we just pinch this plastic and that it'll release from the tabs. Well, there we go. So that's yolk. This could be a high feld part as well, because on the yolk is plastic, and our armature on our solenoid is constantly, every dispense, it's pulling on that plastic, pulling up on there to push down on the paddle arms. So you can wear a circle. It'll look like a circle shape in here because that metal there, armature is a circle. And it can wear down, and what happens is as that wears down, it's not pulling far enough to engage that paddle arm. So you might see on a service call, soda and syrup out of the valve are sitting there in their, what would be the term? They're sitting there just pop, 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 how that goes. And don't laugh, George. But if you have a pulsating flow of syrup and water, it could be an indicator that the yolk is worn and needs replaced. Pulsating, that's the word. Okay, so here's our retainer plate in here. The newer valves have just one single plate. The older valves may have two individual plates that are holding our adjustment controls in place here. But we're going to remove the 5 screws here. They're flathead screws. Sometimes easier if you had a 1/4-inch nut driver, a lot easier to take off of there. But the reason I heard they make flat screws, anything exterior surface is typically a flat screw. It's easier to clean a flat screw than a Phillips. So some health departments will require flat screws. All 5 of these screws are the same size screws. Okay, now we have our adjustment controls here, we can see. Now there is a tool they make, extractor tool. I recommend carrying one. It makes the process a lot easier than what we're getting to here shortly. If you grab a screwdriver and you pry up on this, there's a good chance that you may crack that adjustment screw. Sometimes they just flow. They come right out with your hands. Sometimes they're really tough to get out. If it's tough to get out, what we're going to do is turn this adjustment screw all the way in. And on our multi-tool, this tool extractor, the threads here on this one side are the same threads that are in that adjustment screw. So we take our tool, you turn it in until you have a firm grip, and if we pull this out, it will remove that adjustment control. Nice little multi-tool to have. So we'll do the other side as well. And I'll pull that right out. Okay, the adjustment controls are the same left and right. Soda or water side, syrup side, they are the same. So if you mix them up, no big deal. Now we look in here, we see our ceramic adjustment controls, our spool and sleeves, and a spring. So if you tip it over, the springs will come right out. You have one spring that's larger than the other. So the larger spring is always on our soda or water side. Because we notice in there, if we look at the valve like it came out on the tower here, the left side has a larger hole in there. 80% of our drink is water, and the other 30 is going to be our syrup. So to allow for more flow, it's a larger hole in there, and it's a larger spring that supports that piston in there. To remove the ceramic, ceramic's very fragile. You never want to use a screwdriver or pliers to get those out of there. Sometimes you can just flip it over and they come right out, but sometimes you're going to need this multi-tool to remove it. So on the multi-tool, we have a couple foamed ends here, and how this tool works, when you put the tool inside that ceramic spool, as we turn it clockwise, this foam is going to widen out. So it's going to grab that spool and sleeve from the inside. So sometimes you might have to start this up, get a little wide here. But as I put that in there and turn it clockwise, it widens out and then it grabs that spool right out of there. And I can do it for the syrup side as well. And it will come right out. Okay, to pull the sleeves out, we're going to use the larger end. You put that in there, same thing, clockwise will widen it out, and you can grab that sleeve out of there. There you go. It's a nice tool to have. Ceramic is very expensive, so you don't want to use, again, your pliers or screwdriver to remove those. Now the spool, left and right, the hole positions are the same, so it does not matter when we put this back together. Now the sleeves, the holes are lined up the same. Now the spool here, it is crucial that you always put the wider one in the left-hand side or water part of the valve, because more flow of water. So now we're left with our valve body here. So again, if you have a cracked valve leaking, or maybe one of these tabs broke off that supports the lever, it's a lot more inexpensive to replace this upper valve body than a complete valve. And it doesn't take long. The more you do this, the faster you can tear into it and rebuild it. It's not a long process. So now we're going to reinstall here. So first thing to do is put our sleeves back in place. Just take your finger, push this in, and let it bottom out. Sometimes these O-rings will need lubricated, so you can get just a little bit of water on your finger, lubricate that O-ring, and it will let it slide in there a lot easier. Okay, remember, left-hand side is going to be the larger hole here. Don't force this in. Just stick it in there, give it a little wiggle, and it will fall in place. Don't want to break that ceramic. And we'll do the syrup side as well. All right, so once the spool and sleeve are in place, we're going to take our springs. Remember, the left-hand side has that larger spring, and the syrup side on the right-hand side's got the smaller spring. So when the springs are in place, we're going to put our adjustment controls in here. Now these are the same, remember, left and right. These tabs on here, it may not line up, and all we need to do is spin it a 180 to get that put back in there. So there's your tabs, and push it in place. Okay, same thing. There we go. Once those in there, then we're going to take our faceplate. Make sure, if you have the faceplate that does have the words on there, water and syrup, make sure those are facing out so we can see that later on. And we're going to put our 5 screws in place here. The screws, again, nut driver might work better for you. When we tighten these down, I would tighten them all down except for the one in the middle. The one in the middle ultimately is going to support or hold our cover in place. Okay, once that's in place, we are going to put our yoke in here. Now the yoke, you have a curved side and you have a straight side here. So just got to make sure the curved end is going to push on our paddle arms eventually. We don't want to put it upside down. You'll know as soon as you reinstall the valve and try to do ratio, and you can't do ratio, nothing's coming out. It's because this yoke is placed upside down. So I always lay this valve assembly upside down on a table and just make sure this curved end is facing up towards you. But we're just going to pinch this and get those tabs to go right in those little holes there, like so. Okay. Let me zoom in there for you. Okay, the paddle arms, you do have a little notch right here on the upper housing. And then on our lower housing, again, that same notch is on here. We just got to make sure the metal part of these banjos or paddle arms are laying inside that groove. And you notice it lines up right on that yoke, the curved end of that yoke. Okay. Then we're going to put our lower housing in place. And before we put any screws in here, I hold this down with my hands, just make sure the yoke has good movement. It's pushing up on these paddle arms. Paddle arms are moving. If they're not in that groove, you're going to see it's real stiff. It doesn't move. But always just double check prior to putting the screws in. Now, the 2 screws that hold this lower plate is going through the top. So we'll place our screws in here. Never over tighten with your screws. You can crack that plastic. All right, once it's in place, before I forget, I'm going to put my bail wire in here because it can be challenging. If the solenoid's in there, it won't allow this tab to move. So we'll put our bail wire, slide it right in there, like so. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to put our armature on here. Now the armature is going to loop into the yoke. So if I zoom in here, that piece is going to loop. Let's see if I get that on camera there. Loops right in there. So if I look at the bottom here, it's looped in that yoke, and ultimately that's pulling down or pushing on the paddle arms. So it just slides right into there. And I put my finger here to support it before putting the solenoid on. Okay, solenoid, I left the harness in there, makes it nice and easy. Will go right in place. And in the front here, 2 little screws will hold that solenoid in. Now before I do that, I just make sure I have good movement, hitting those paddle arms. Looks very good. So now we're going to put the 2 screws. These are probably the smallest screws in the valve here. We're going to just put that in the solenoid. Like so. Okay, then I'm going to put my micro switch in place here, cherry switch made by the Cherry Company, I believe. That will just go right in that slot, and remember that retainer will push down and hold the switch in place for you. And if I put it in right, it might help out. There we go. Ultimately, when we hit our lever, the lever, top of the lever is going to hit that cherry switch, and then our solenoid with fire, pull up on the paddle arms. Pull up on the yoke, which pushes down on the paddle arms, and then you have your flow of syrup and water coming out. Next thing we do, before I do the bottom plate, and sometimes when I put it together, I forget to put my lever on there. I left the spring on the lever, so all we need to do is, it's going to connect to these 2 tabs on here. So once we have that lever in place, we're going to just take your thumb and stretch that spring right around that little bracket right there. Okay. When we put our bottom plate in place now, we need to have this lever in the back position. So what we're going to do is just put your finger up here, push this back and hold it. Make sure your springs for your paddle arms are in place on the bottom plate. You're going to put this at a 45-degree angle and just allow your springs to come down gently and pushed on the paddle arms. Okay. I'm going to support the bottom plate with my hands here and just verify that the springs are lined up and touching the paddle arms. So you can see right in there, I believe. That's good. And then this side, that spring in there is hitting the paddle. So if the springs are bent, you may have to just remove your bottom plate again and try again, or get a small screwdriver, go in there and line up those springs. If they're not lined up with the paddle arms, you'll just have a steady drip coming out of that nozzle. Okay. I am going to keep pressure on here. I'm going to install my 6 screws here. The longer screws go around the nozzle. Like so. The 2 smaller screws will go up here by the lever. Like so. Then we can put our diffuser in place here. Our nozzle will twist right on there. And we can now mount this to our unit right on the mounting block. Open that bail wire up, push the valve onto the mounting block, engage the bail wire to clip to the shutoff block. To open our valve block, we're just going to use our little tool here. Give this just a 1/4 turn, and that is in the open position. Okay. Now, anytime you got to rebuild a valve, you want to check your water flow rate. So you grab your ratio cup to achieve. You want for a 3-ounce valve, you want 10 ounces of water in 4 seconds. So count the 4, get 10 ounces, and then that's dialed in. Then you're going to take your syrup separator. That'll be another video. We'll do our syrup side to adjust that to the water. Okay. Then we're going to install our cover here. Well, once that's plugged into the tower, we install our cover. And you can tighten down on that center screw to hold the cover in place. And then our front plate will, its grooves here, it'll just slide right in place and lock it down. Okay. That is the LEV 3.0 valve. Hopefully you may have learned something today, but that's how we disassemble and reassemble. Just remember, if you got any components in there that have failed, replace the components. Don't just replace a complete valve. That's just a lot of money to charge our customers, and the build is really simple. Couldn't be simpler, really, and easy to do.